jury, who sits in the room, and who is the jury of the grand jury? Okay. Okay, yeah. So it seems the point of a grand jury is to find evidence of a crime and bring charges. So I guess where are we seeing or have seen grand juries, and where are they active now?
So I'll talk about this a little bit. And so, hi everyone, Freddy Martinez, Executive Director of Lucy Parsons Labs, and I've been on a handful of grand jury support committees. I've written about grand juries. I was on supporting Jeremy when he was doing his grand jury resistance. And I think I want to point out here, like what you just said, is that the point of the grand jury is not to exonerate people. It's not to put on a trial. It's not to to seek evidence. The point is to get evidence, enough evidence to charge someone with a crime. And how we've seen that play out is that the state is very good at figuring out what things it does want to consider a crime and what things it doesn't consider crimes. Like if your bike gets arrested, your bike gets stolen today, like you're not going to get it back, right? But what we saw, like in Michigan, there was some pro-Palestine graffiti a few years ago. Like the government is well equipped to go after those people, and so we've seen places like that where the government's making political choices about what is a grand jury, who do we want to investigate with these supposed crimes. And so where we have seen some grand juries historically, the protests against Trump on January 2016, there was a large grand jury there. We've seen them against the environmental movement, including at Standing Rock, and struggles around indigenous sovereignty. We've seen them against the Shack 7, the animal liberation movement. In the Shack 7 case, those people were investigated for reposting content that other people involved in the animal liberation movement were sending those people, right? So like running websites where they were sharing stuff about what was happening across the country. I don't know if some of you may be old enough to remember, but the Holy Land Foundation and other funders trying to raise money for Palestinian liberation. Jeremy Hammond was resisted a grand jury, and I was also part of the grand jury. The support committee supporting Chelsea Manning as she was resisting her grand jury summons. And one of our followers online let us know that there's a very active grand jury in Pittsburgh. So just to give you a sense of like where we have seen them in the last even like 5 or 10 years. And when we see that like there are calls for like Trump is saying like we're going to investigate people under terrorism laws, like that's one of the ways that they're going to, one of the tools that they'll attempt to use. Do you want to say anything about the political like aspect of the grand jury?
Sure. Hey y'all, thanks for coming on. My name is Jeremy. Local anarchist, troublemaker. I was in prison when I was subpoenaed and resisted grand jury. We'll get into that later. But yeah, to your question though, y'all did a great job explaining how they have used to target political movements. But I just want to say one thing that they, they say the grand jury targets and can indict the ham and the sandwich, right? But one thing that they don't go after is killer cops, right? Like straight up, like how many times like they throw the case and so forth, even though like 1 out of 2,000 times a case comes in front of the grand jury, they do indict people. But also there's local recent stuff too. In like 2010 and 2011, like the feds here in Chicago, they did subpoena 23 local international solidarity and Palestinian activists. Some for just as simple as just like having visited Palestine, for example, or and they had subpoenaed them for a grand jury, and they all collectively resisted and beat that back. But in other cases, it's quite serious, and depending on how hard they go after people, like you mentioned Dr. Abdel Hamim Al Ashkar did like 10 years for criminal contempt. And so there's a couple other cases too, like there's one it's not funny because he did do 10 years and he's 76 in a wheelchair, but there was a deep sea explorer who found some buried treasure, and they actually wanted that treasure, and they subpoenaed him and put him in prison for over 10 years because he wouldn't reveal where the hidden gold was. But last year actually beat it, but then they beat that case, but they got 2 more years after that. Steve Martinez, one of the quotes is on some of the papers that they printed out. He was involved in Standing Rock. And I think in that particular case, like, it was a situation where the cops were using what they call less lethal weapons, and it had horribly, like, mangled someone's arm. And Steve Martinez volunteered to drive the person to get emergency services and stuff like that. Man, the feds subpoenaed him and put him in jail because they wanted to know the extent of this person's injury, whether they were lying or some shit like that, right? Like, it's just some really sick, vicious stuff, which is actually quite characteristic of this American fascist empire. But I think it's some kings and queens shit, actually, like from 1500s or something like that. But I think every country around the world has basically abandoned this in favor of like a more adversarial, transparent system, supposedly, right? But unfortunately, it is a tool that they continue to use, and will probably see much more of that in their toolbox coming up, as we know.
Thank you. So my next question is, for how long can these investigations go on?
Well, the life of the grand jury is 18 months. And the government can reconvene the grand jury if they're not done with their investigation for another 18 months. But they can keep investigating as long as they want to. The consequence of the 18 months is if you decide that you're not going to cooperate with the government in its efforts to destroy your movement, and you end up being held in civil contempt, then you can be held in prison for the life of the grand jury. So it's whatever time is remaining of that 18 months when you ultimately are held in contempt. And I just because that sounds very frightening, you know, that you're going to go to prison if you don't cooperate. It's not always the case, but it can be the case. And you generally have time to work with a lawyer to prepare and decide how you're going to confront the situation. But the civil contempt, and am I getting ahead of myself? Okay. Put me in check if I do. You too. Civil contempt the idea is not to punish you, which is absurd because putting you in prison is a punishment per se. But the law is that civil contempt is only to coerce you, encourage you to cooperate, because you hold the key to your own prison cell. You can come out anytime you want to, as long as you capitulate to what the government is asking you to do. And so any time it converts to punishment is technically unconstitutional and illegal. And when that can happen is if you say, there is no amount of time you make me do that is ever going to make me cooperate. And if that is a message to the judge, it's called grumbles, and Jeremy can talk much more intimately about that, is a way of saying, you cannot keep me in jail, or you keep me in jail for as long as you want to. I will never cooperate. And then that converts into punishment. And then the judge is supposed to say, well, we can't force you and you get to go home. But that's very rare.
Yeah. And in the case of Chelsea Manning, she was actually in front of 2 grand juries because the grand jury that she was resisting expired. So what happened is that she said, I will never cooperate. I have nothing to cooperate with you. That grand jury ran out. She was in jail for about 8 months. Then about 2 weeks later, they reconvened a second grand jury investigating the same investigation and then put her back in jail. She was being fined, I think, $10,000 a day. It was like she says it's the most expensive hotel she's ever been in. At the end of the grand jury, she still had to pay back the fines that she was accumulating. It was almost $250,000. These are like ideas, like the idea that it's not a punishment. You know, and this was a very extreme case because the government was looking, and you know, they said you have a lot of supporters, so you know, we know that they'll support you and we'll continue to fine you. That's not always the case, but you know, the idea that it's not a punishment, that we're just putting you in jail until we can get you to cooperate or to talk or to give over the information we're looking for. I mean, it is absurd, but we have seen that kind of situation play out. Yeah. So these grand juries can go on for 18 months. They can get renewed. In the case of the Holy Land Foundation, they were investigated for almost 15 years before they were ever charged with a crime. So like these things, like again, it goes back to that thing that we said, that there are political decisions being made about who is worth investigating and for what purpose.
And I just want to clarify something. If you get subpoenaed to a grand jury, it doesn't mean that they are trying to put you in, that they're going to bring a criminal case against you. It means that they think that you're a witness. Sometimes they go for somebody who they think is way down on the significance level, because they might look at you and say, well, here's a weak person. We think they know something, and we think if we use the muscle of the federal government that we can get some information. Maybe they're not after you at all, but they know that you may know something, and if you give up somebody, then they can more refine their investigation. And it's like, and a lot of times they'll say to you, well, if you don't have anything to hide, if you didn't do anything, then you should just cooperate, because otherwise it's going to be very costly. But the thing is that it can also be very costly in another way if you do cooperate. And that is, you might lose your credibility with your movement. You might, not be able to sleep at night. You might feel terrible about what you're doing. And it's a way for the government to say, okay, well, we know then if you cooperate with me and you tell me it's not you, we know it's not you, but there were 3 people on the scene, and that means the other 2 we're going to focus on. And you don't want to necessarily let yourself be used that way. So there's lots of things to think through about if you get a subpoena, and your lawyer can find out for you if you're a target or not, which you do want to know immediately. But you want to be informed, and you want to work with your movement to make sure that you have the support, and when you're making decisions that are affecting not just your life, but the lives of the people who you love and care about and are in struggle with.
Yeah, great points. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head, actually, is that we are not alone in this. You know what I mean? And that the decisions that you make and the things that you say, even before the subpoena happens and stuff like that, you just, this is not outside the scope of this conversation, but all the regular security culture, anti-repression stuff apply. For example, whose name do you put on the organization's paperwork, or who's like logging into the social media accounts and stuff like that. Like every bit exposes, not just yourself, but the people that you're around. But we are not alone. And then, like you said, notify folks, about what's happening, to be transparent. I think we're going to get into that later, but just one more note on the timing thing. Yeah, they could stack it. Generally I've heard 6 months, that's how long it takes for a judge to think that perhaps you are uncoercible. But a lot of that depends on, it's entirely the judge's discretion, but it is on the burden of the witness, that's what they call us, I guess, to show that we are uncoercible. And then because then it becomes a punitive thing and the judge still thinks. So that's why being a part of community, being part of a social movement, and having people who could vouch for you, who could share maybe anecdotes in your, for example, like our Grumbles motion, we'll get into that. Like a lot of that was just experiences from my life, or like letters for people who have like known me and stuff like that, to try to convince the judge that you're uncoercible. But, and I'll get into like my own personal story later, but one thing on the timeline thing is that the prosecutor like threatened, he's like, yeah, guess what? Yeah, you might win this motion, but we could just open a whole new grand jury and start this whole thing over again, 18 months. And we could do that over and over and over again. And this is some national security prosecutor's name is Andrew Kromberg or some shit. And he was I knew a bunch of people in that jail I was with that he was actually giving time to people who had never even been to the United States, getting like 60 months for like national security shit. He's a terrible person. He had like a tie. He always wore this tie. It had like a dog on it, right? And we always called him Dog Tie, just cause, man. But anyways, he said that. He's like, yeah, you might be this motion, but we're going to do this again, right? And he's like, and I don't care how many times you do this, I'm going to make the same decision every single time, right? Man, these people are vicious, though, but that's why every single chance you get to give them the finger, man, take that chance.
And then I just want to say one thing, too, is like, part of the reason that we wanted to intentionally bring like such a big cross-section of society is because you never know when you're going to be the target of, or have a friend who's the target of a grand jury. The first like grand jury training I did was probably like 15 years ago plus now. And like, I didn't expect to have 2 friends get grand jury, and like let's say that they're looking after like the local mosque, they can subpoena, you know, people who come do social work there, people who donate money, people who sign petitions, people who just go and pray. They can look after the finance, who's the board, like, and so like these kinds of things have a lot of tentacles, and you really don't, like, one of the things that I think we're going to switch into to talking about is like, you don't know where the tentacles are going. And so it's really important that like we kind of have a sense of like what to do when these kinds of things happen, because you don't really know who can be ensnared by them. Because like Jan was saying, that like the prosecutor controls the entire process. So if they think that like the paletero across the street knows something about what happened here today, they'll go get him, right? And so it is pretty vicious. So that's like one real like critical point that we wanted to make before we moved on.
Yeah, I want to add a historical example. When you asked about like a mosque, in the 1970s, when the Puerto Rican independence movement was very active, and the FALN, the Armed Forces for National Liberation, was very active, the government decided that they were going to go after the Episcopal Church's Latino council. And the first people that they subpoenaed, and I think this was because they thought they were weak and vulnerable, were the chair of that council and her secretary. And one was a Jewish woman, the other was a Mexican woman, and they were investigating the Puerto Rican independence movement. And I think the government thought, these are easy targets, they're going to cave in a second. Those women did at least 6 months in prison, saying, you know, we have credibility in our church, in our community, and how could we ever cooperate with the government? And they went to jail for a very long time. The thing was that the Puerto Rican independence movement had a principle of non-collaboration. And together, they were able to really stem the tide of the government's investigation. Nobody cooperated, and the government didn't get what they wanted. And the grand jury then was not an effective tool for purposes of trying to destroy that movement. On the other hand, several of the people who did do civil contempt, because it went way beyond those two, several of the people who did civil contempt and then got out were then gone after for criminal contempt, which is something we can talk about when we get to that.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems like breeding a culture, like a secure culture of accountability in movement spaces, like helps resist grand juries. That's really nice. So the next question I have, what happens when you, your clients, your friends get called to testify in front of a grand jury? What constitutional rights do you have? And can we break down a bit how the process actually operates?
Sure. Well, my case is a little bit different because I was actually already in prison by the time that they subpoenaed me. And they also, as they often do, found a loop end around the, normally you have to have a writ of habeas corpus ad testificandum or some shit like that. Like because I was like DOJ property, they just filled a one form out. And I was already in prison at the time, but generally though, yeah, you'll get a subpoena, man, talk to a lawyer immediately. I don't know the form and function that they do deliver these subpoenas, probably like marshals at your door or some creep shit or at your job or something. But, they'll bring you in front of a grand jury. You have like right to an attorney, but not in the room, right? I guess in my case, I spent like a couple of months like taking Con Air and went to like a couple different jails before I even got to the jail in the East Coast, the state that I think I drove through Virginia once, but so I was in jail, and then they brought you in front of the grand jury room, and it's very strange, like, because it's dirty-ass concrete and just nothing, right? Like, government buildings, and all of a sudden you're in, like, a really nice wood-paneled room with carpet and stuff like that, but I'm still stinking. But then you got all these suits and stuff like that, marshals looking serious. But, so I looked at the grand... Are we going in this? Yeah. Sure. I mean, like, in my case, I also already kind of half-assed knew what the situation was because, like, I had seen, like you had mentioned, Chelsea Manning was subpoenaed, like about a year ahead of time. And the government actually contacted my lawyer, and then my lawyers contacted me in jail, so that I heard from my attorneys and stuff like that, and I kind of knew what it was. But you might not know what it is about at all. And then, like, I can't remember all the times I've been arrested, and I'm not saying anything, but I'm thinking, I'm pacing a cell. Was it A? Was it B? Was it C? It could have been. I'm just kidding. But you know, like, maybe you think that you could talk your way out of, like, ascertaining information like that. Don't. They are trained investigators. They know what they're doing. Like, they will walk circles around you. There is no way that you could, you know, like they say, just shut the fuck up, man. Don't say a goddamn word. But yeah, anyways, the grand jury room, there's a jury of your peers, and then there's a prosecutor. You got no allies, no comrades. There's not even a judge, not no lawyer or whatever like that. But I believe that I did take advantage of the opportunity that in between when they ask you the question, I'll be like, yep, I need to see my attorney. Then I start the shuffle outside the room, and then my attorney's in the next room, and then we just bullshit for a little bit, wasting their time. We already know what the answer is going to be, right? No, I had nothing to say, right? As a matter of fact, this one particular time, I don't know if y'all heard, what is it, the Bartleby the Scrivener? It's like a, right? Classic, you know, I think it became like popular again during Occupy Wall Street times, right? And I was arrested around that era, right? So I thought it was going to be a little funny, right? When he's like, so yeah, did Julian Assange ask you to hack all those websites? And I thought I'd give him a Bartleby. I was like, nah, I prefer not to answer, right? And then he actually recognized that this wannabe literary dude, he's like, what? You gave me the Bartleby, right? So, and then the dude later on, like, he like attempted, he's like, me and my lawyers were sitting there, and my lawyers actually brought some street food. Like, it was one of the only opportunities I was able to eat street food in fucking forever. Like, I had an orange for the first time in so many fucking years. Excuse me. But so I'm sitting here eating my sandwich, and the prosecutor, the dog tie, walks in, and he's like, look, you don't have to talk to me, but please just maybe hear me out just for 1 minute. Like, you know, you could, like, and I'm just like, God, man, what the fuck? And he's like, you know, Bartleby died in jail, right? Like, it was like, damn, like, and then he goes on just for like 30 seconds to a minute. He's like, yeah, so Julian Assange is a Russian spy. You know, he's fucks with Trump and all that stuff. This is against me. He's like, I'm sitting here, he's like, I go to my lawyer, he's like, this is the best damn sandwich of my life, man. Yeah. So then, like, in between every question, they take you back in the jury room, and then they ask you the questions. You know, after I said no a few times, they did read in sequence the list of questions that they wanted to ask, which I kind of already knew. I guess the main thing is have a legal team and let the folks know in the world, you know what I mean, so that they got your back, and also just to give other people an indication about what, like you said, where are the tentacles heading, you know what I mean? There's probably a couple other little details about the grand jury that could say. They took me twice, but in front of the jury. But yeah, that's all I got right now.
Well, one of the details we haven't talked about is that the prosecutor, if you say that you're not going to cooperate, will give you a grant of immunity. And that means that anything that you say can't be used against you in a court of law. It doesn't mean that it can't be used against somebody else. But it ups the ante a little bit, because once you've been granted immunity, that's it. Yeah. So that usually does happen to people who are non-cooperating, and then you decide what to do. But there are lots of rights that you have and that your lawyer can litigate, there's strategic reasons to do that. I mean, one is obviously you don't want to go to jail, but another is the longer you can use your legal rights to challenge the process, the grand jury's 18 months is running and you're still out. So, yeah.
And I think just to break it down a little bit, because it sounds great that you have immunity, but don't get it twisted that it is actually immunity. So, like, if hypothetical, we have the government is looking into a bank robbery that they think me and Jeremy and Jan participated in, they'll say, hey, Freddy, you have immunity. Nothing that you say to me can be used against a criminal in a criminal conviction. That doesn't mean that the bank won't go after you to seize any money that you might have taken from that bank robbery. That doesn't mean that anything Jeremy says won't be used against me. That doesn't mean that anything Jan says won't be used against me. And so, like, you hear all of these variations of the prisoner dilemma, and, like, philosophers love to talk about the prisoner dilemma, but, like, actually criminals, like, actually know the best outcome is nobody talks and everybody walks. And so like this idea that you're going to get immunity in front of like a grand jury and that is a reason that you should cooperate is not, it's not immunity. It's not like you're going to get to go home at the end of the day. Like they're not done with you. So like the best thing to do is just shut up, like Jeremy said, and talk to your lawyer and devise a legal strategy.
Thank you. I have a question specifically for Jeremy based on your experience. So, Jeremy, you were sentenced and you took a non-cooperating plea deal. So what could the government gain from trying to get you to testify?
Yeah. I was arrested in 2012 for my participation in Anonymous. I was hacking a bunch of government websites, police websites, and taking their emails and addresses and putting them out there and all that. One specific thing, I allegedly gave a lot of documents to WikiLeaks. And so that happened in 2012. You know, I pled guilty. I had a couple co-defendants. They all got like, I think 6 months to 13 months. They were in the UK. I think I was the only person in the United States that was on my case besides the informant. He got like no time and I got 10 years. They maxed me, but you know, within the context of white collar computer crime where the maximum was 10 years, whereas a lot of other type of crimes, let's be honest, is a mandatory minimum of 10 years. So just being real about the justice system here. But what could they gain? Like, so they were at the time going after Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, right? And they were trying to, what they were asking about, they wanted me to support their prosecution by saying that, did Julian Assange ask you to hack all these companies? Did he pay you to hack all these companies? There's a few other questions along those lines, but yes, that was more or less, and who else was involved? I'm sure they probably want to know all that stuff, right? And the thing about it is, like, they knew that, like, I was never going to cooperate. Like, I mean, like, my first case, like, and second case, and, okay, I got a little bit of a benefit of having been arrested, like, a dozen times, like, kind of small, minor misdemeanor stuff where you kind of learn the ropes about, like, when a cop comes in, I don't want to, where my fuck my lawyer at, man? Like, I also got to get some food or some shit, you know. So I had when it's low stakes stuff, I kind of learned the ropes a little bit, so when it came down to it, I kind of was not like, I knew how to do time. But so they knew that I was never going to cooperate in the first place, just like they knew Chelsea wasn't going to cooperate in the first place. But like, why? Like, just repression generally. But they definitely did want to, again, like grand juries do, drive a wedge, right? Drive a wedge between movements because they love to see people tear each other apart. They love to see people turn on each other and movements fail and high-profile takedowns and people doing time. And yeah, so that's probably why, but I was 3 months to the door. Like, I mean, damn, I was at the end of my sentence. I was looking at the calendar, like, and it didn't even seem real to me. Like, I swear, I was like, it's like, dude, am I really going home in 3 months? I had already done at this point 7, 8 years. Kind of sucks even more too, because I was also in this program, this drug program, that I was able to get a year off of prison. It's the only way in the feds that you could get time off is RDAP, a residential drug program. So I already done like 9 months of it, a different prison, got kicked out, but I was in another prison, right? And I was about to finish it in 3 months, right? So not only did they, during the course of I'm skipping ahead to my personal story here. Yeah. So not only did they suspend the serving of my sentence, I don't like to use serve shit, but so they suspended that while I was in contempt as a means to coerce my whatever like that. But not only that, but they actually took me out of the drug program, so they also tacked on an extra year to my sentence too that I would have earned. And since we're talking about how they fucked me, also when I finished my contempt or whatever like that, I was also immediately eligible for release to the halfway house because they could let you do the last year of your sentence in a federal halfway house up to 10% of your time, which is a year, in my case. But of course, in order to do that, I had to be back in a Bureau of Prison facility to have the particular case manager sign my paperwork. And it just so happens that COVID hit and they shut down all transfers. And I was in some weird ass jail in Oklahoma for like 6 months. People caught COVID, people dying and shit like that. It was the worst jail ever, triple stat bunks. I was there for like 6 months in a jail that was really only meant to be holding people for more than 3 or 4 days, right? And then even then, when I finally did make it to the Bureau of Prisons, it took them like another 4 or 5 months just to sign my release papers for no reason. So I did like 2 years extra on this dumbass shit when I was 3 months to the door, right? But I don't regret a single thing, not one thing. If anything, first off, the only thing I regret is I was not precise enough when I was active to finish all the targets that I was doing. Maybe I shouldn't have been at the place where I was on probation at. Maybe I should have been hopping around. There's a lot of things that I should have, but I definitely don't regret doing it. And I definitely don't regret, refusing. So the government knew that I was always going to refuse the whole time. They knew I was getting out. They just want to fuck over me and Chelsea and Julian, so that's.
So did you have support from the outside during this time?
Yeah.
What did it look like?
Yeah, so I am definitely quite lucky and fortunate and privileged to be able to have a community behind me. I was already kind of well known a little bit, and so I did have people write letters to my in support of my Grumbles motion to say that I was a history of being in the movement and stuff like that. Man, there was not a day to go by that I didn't get letters in the mail. You know what I mean? And throughout my prison sentence, books. And just to know that people out there are thinking about you, like that you get to hear your name at mail call and stuff like that, even if, people are like, oh man, I don't know what to say about people writing and stuff like that. So if there's one other thing besides like what you're learning here, just to take away from today is also just write someone, because you never know what that message can mean to someone behind bars. You know what I mean? It could be that one little message of support. Maybe they're pre-trial thinking about like, man, I'm looking at 10 years myself. What do I do? And if people feel alone, that's when people kind of retreat into maybe individualism but we are in community, man. We got to have each other's backs, especially when they are under the gun like this. So I did have a lot of support. And so when I got out, I definitely went all in on supporting those who were left behind, because I was one of the lucky ones to get out, frankly, right? So, yeah, I had a lot of support. Mail call, it meant everything. So, yeah.
Cooper and I came to visit you a couple of times.
Yeah, that's right.
I was up the street in D.C., so I was always coming and dropping off checks for people. And then sometimes I would help parents whose kids were locked up, because they were like, I have no idea where to get a money order, because that's the only place people need to get money orders still. So there was a noise demo outside of a New Year's Eve outside of the prison.
Yo, that was so cool.
Yeah. So there was a lot happening, and thankfully, because I had that training, a decade plus at that time, I would just I would just hop on the train and go down there and stuff. And when your friends came to visit, I was like, yeah, let me take you to this place, and this is the restaurant I eat when I'm in town. And yeah, so that happened.
That made everything.
Yeah. And then the other thing too that was really crazy is that when you were in the grand jury room, there were folks who came down. Some of your supporters were down there. I was down there, and we actually got kicked out of the courtrum. So they were like, Jeremy, are you going to testify? And he's like, no. And it was the first time I had seen Jeremy since a decade plus at that point, when we were running around Chicago, stealing beers at computer clubs and stuff like that. And so I hadn't seen him in a decade plus, and we were in the courtroom, and the only people that were there was the FBI. There was 3 FBI agents, the prosecutor, Jeremy's lawyer, and then his supporters, and then we all got kicked out of the room because of national security reasons. And then the court played white noise so that you couldn't hear what they were saying. And then Jeremy's lawyer was like, hey, are you going to tell us what you're talking to them about? And they're like, no. And then it was, so, that's the kind of stuff that you kind of, it's typical of seeing it in those courtroom settings. But yeah, there was definitely people who both knew you and showed up to things I think I came to probably every court hearing you had, because I was just right down the street, and some of your other folks too. So yeah.
One more thing. Hell yeah. One more thing is that not just myself who appreciate, but man, the people in the jail see that. And they recognize it, and it gives people collective strength. It's like, damn, people care about it. Look out the window and see people waving banners or shooting lights and stuff like that, man. People know that there are those out there, that they're not cast aside, that they're not buried and isolated and dehumanized, that they're human. And also judges recognize that in court too. You have a whole strong showing and stuff like that, maybe they feel less likely to try some bullshit. But one more thing too on this is that while we do appreciate everybody who does reach out and stuff like that, just to be very clear, it's also a little bit of a honeypot, right? If you're in jail, who's writing you? Yeah, they're reading that stuff. Who are you calling? Yeah, now your number's cross-referenced and stuff like that. And, you go to court as FBI and feds and stuff like that. It's kind of a little bit scary, but maybe you don't want to be seen and stuff like that. But I knew this, and I just want to impart to people that, yeah, people do understand completely if people need to take I support y'all from afar, but I can't write you because I got a situation or whatever like that. And that's totally respectable as well. Yep.
So the final question before we take questions from the audience. So when are tactics of harassment successful?
Yeah. I'll just be a little bit brief here. there's a great zine that we printed out parts from called Green Scared, and it talks about like some of the grand juries around the Green Scare in the 1990s. And one thing that we saw in that prosecution, and we see this a lot, is the feds were all over that for like years, and they couldn't get anyone to testify until like what ended up happening was that there was a lot of like infighting. There was like some substance abuse issues, and so that like and then there was like these social bonds like in the Pacific Northwest where everyone was like basically resisting together, and those social bonds really broke down, and that's when the feds started getting cracks into and getting into the community and getting informants. So really it is like I know, you know, leftist infighting is it's like as popular as leftism is, right? But like you know, it does have risks, you know, and so that is like one place that we've seen a very serious like that is a very serious concern, right? Is like it's not just about like we have to look out for each other because we care about each other in our community, but there are also like these kind of network effects that happen. And
yeah, I completely agree. I want to say also that perhaps the government will go after people who are employing a tactic that might be like spicier than maybe some people. So they isolate the radicals, they try to condemn the criminality, and I think that they also possibly depend on some of the more like liberal nonprofit coalition types to also condemn that and to join them in condemning that. And so if there is that type of like public debate or even condemnations or betrayals even, let's say it, like let's say if you're at a demo and stuff like that, a big march and a few people get arrested and stuff like that, maybe some of the coalition organizers will be quick to denounce it. Don't do that. Don't do that. So like I'm just saying St. Paul principles, for example. Yeah, for reals, I mean like they did that in the RNC in 2008, like the St. Paul principles, where they were like, okay, for the purposes of this demo, we're going to like agree not to, we're going to respect the diversity of tactics, but also respect the separation of time and space so as to not drag others in. But we're not going to be doing public condemnations or airing out internal like dirty laundry, not necessarily. Not to say that criticism and conflict can be helpful, but like you don't want to show our own internal weaknesses to the enemy because they will exploit that. A few other things too, just thinking about, I had a zine over there called No Justice, No Pleas, which is kind of related to grand jury resistance, but it's about how it's just recognition that the Department of Justice depends on like 90-something% plus of all cases are handled through plea agreements. People voluntarily plead guilty out of fear of going to trial with higher charges and risking everything because the government will basically punish you if you do assert your rights at trial. They'll just sentence you extra hard. So a lot of times people will take that little deal and stuff like that. And you know, everybody's got their own individual life circumstances, maybe there's job or kids, and sometimes like a deal is an easy way, of course, not in such a way that throws others under the bus. But sometimes in these big protest situations, like there's a J20 zine over there in the RNC I mentioned and stuff like that, or a lot of people got arrested and stuff like that. They did joint defense agreements where they all agreed like mutually ahead of time, look, we're not going to throw anyone under the bus. We're not going to give any evidence, and we're going to be deliberate about like what choices we make because it affects everybody, right? And so things like we're all going to go to trial together. It's yeah, like you said, the RICO case, the 61 folks, you know, got a RICO case in Georgia trying to stop this Cop City project. They had this similar agreement, and they are chipping away at the prosecution's, you know, bad case, right? So there's a zine over there, No Justice, No Pleas. I thought it was pretty good. The idea is that if everybody does collectively refuse to plead guilty, the government actually doesn't have the resources or time to fight each individual case, so it puts us in a better collective agreement position. And in the J20 case, almost everybody got off. I think 20 out of like 200 something people actually did plead guilty in some circumstances. And the prosecution themselves got humiliated, embarrassed, I think even sanctioned years later. And so this is about attrition. A few other things too, since we're just talking about it before we get to questions, is the responsibility of criminals and stuff like that. Like, it is unfortunate if you are named or identified by the government, you know, for whatever reason, maybe you got arrested in a high-profile case, or you're being subpoenaed and you're not yet in jail, kind of hot, you know what I mean? Like, and so you definitely have to be thinking about like the safety of not yourself, but the people that are around you, because who knows what degree of surveillance that they're doing. So it's also about like informed consent and letting folks around you to being completely transparent, because that way everybody does know what we're up against and we could help each other out, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, it's just really all about collective defense instead of like individualist, like it's all about me, because it ain't. You know what I mean? Like, that's one thing I thought about, like in that cell when they've taken everything, because they could take everything. They could take all your stuff, they could put you in a cell, and they'd be like, this is it unless you cooperate. But you know, the one thing that they can't take is that last inch inside yourself, man, that freedom, your integrity, your urge to rebel and to resist and to refuse. And you know what? That shit is stronger than any of their iron bars, any of them.
Yeah, and that's like one place where we do see a bit of conflict, right? Because like lawyers are looking out for the best case of their client, but you know, like you have to consider. This is why we appreciate so much like what the NLG does, because they're steeped into like our movement's history, and they know why we make the choices that we do, and they're trying to move alongside us and not just like sort of tell us like do this because it's in your best interest.
Yeah, it is so not the lawyer's job to tell you what to do. If a lawyer's telling you what to do, you go find another lawyer. The decision is yours. You're the one that's going to have to do the time. You know, the lawyer isn't going to do the time. And so what the lawyer's job is to tell you what the options are, to tell you what the consequences are for each option. And the lawyer's job is to make you understand what you're up against and to advise you every step of the way and help you make an informed decision. The lawyer's job is not to tell you what to do. And I'm not here today to tell you what to do. I'm not here today to give you legal advice. It's more like, what is the big picture? But you really want to be informed, and so that you make the decision, and hopefully you'll make it in the context of the people who you're working with and the people who you're struggling with, so that you have support every step of the way when you decide what you're going to do. And people are recommending a lot of reading. I want to add to the list. One of my law partners, Michael Deutsch, was very involved in doing grand jury work for many years. He wrote this fabulous, it's a law review article, but it really reads like a novel. It's called The Improper Use of the Federal Grand Jury, an Instrument for the Internment of Political Activists. It's a 1984 article. You can find it online in the Northwestern Law Review. I really recommend it. It's a marvelous history of the development of the grand jury, like from the times in England and then after the U.S. became the U.S. and then how it's been used against different movements, focusing on the Puerto Rican independence movement. But it's a really informative read.
And just before we get, I think we'll switch to Q&A right after this, but food's here. I know we don't want to get cold, but we do have some questions from the audience, and I still have no idea if the live stream ever worked or not, but I'm being told yes. So we do have questions from the live stream, but I do want to, there's one thing I want to, for folks to take away. It's this one quote that we'll do some handouts after this, and just remember that the function of the grand jury is to charge people with crimes. But this is a quote from the Green Scared zine that I think we've got copies everywhere, and it says that if anything discourages people from informing on each other, it's blood ties. Historically, the movements with the least snitchings have been the ones that have been firmly grounded in long-standing communities. Arrestees in the national liberation movement of yesteryear didn't cooperate because they wouldn't be able to face their parents or children again if they did. Likewise, when gangsters involved in illegal capitalist activity refuse to inform, it's because doing so would affect the entirety of their lives, from their prospects in their chosen careers to their social standing in prison as well as their neighborhoods. And so, again, the lawyer's job is to tell you what your options are, and you're the one who has to do the time. But then, do you have a community to come home to? And that prospect of not having a community to come home to, I'd rather, sit on timeout for another 2 years versus when Jeremy, came home. I remember this guy didn't even want to take money to get back to Chicago, and I was like, no. I think we raised $2,000 in 2 hours, and we sent the money right away. And that's the kind of community you want to come home to when you're out of prison, regardless of what you say, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, we'll get to go to and then we'll eat.
So I have a list of questions, but I wanted to see first if there was question. I have a list of questions, but I was wondering if people had questions in the audience. We could ask those first. Anyone have?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I guess we're talking about a grand jury here. Definitely more of a formal bureaucratic thing. If you're at a grand jury, think, man, okay, there's something going on. But yeah, if you're casually arrested in the street.
Repeat the question for
Oh, shit. I'm sorry. Yeah, the question was, like, what does not talking look like? Like, actually look like when you're arrested or if you're given a subpoena. Yeah, please do check out some of these know your rights things. Absolutely. But the main thing is just they try formal interviews, right? And then they also try slick stuff and sometimes get conversating you in the car or some dumb shit. Or you might be in the paddy wagon with like a dozen of your comrades, you know what I mean? That's also the wrong time to talk, right? Like, but yeah, more or less, yeah, dude, just the only thing you really should say is, yeah, I have nothing to say except for my attorney. Also, like, I'm vegan, and also, can I get my glasses? And bang on the door all you want. Can I get a book? There's no toilet paper, right? But yeah, don't talk about your case, any of that stuff in the van or any of that stuff until you see your lawyer. Yeah, and your phone conversations and letters too.
Yeah, and like, like, I've only ever been arrested once, and it was kind of whatever. And like, we're all locked up, and we're all going to the county jail, and I remember the people that I was arrested with were being like, oh, they said I did whatever, and I'm just like, and every like 10 minutes, I'm like, everyone shut the fuck up. And then like I get to the county jail, and they're like, which side of the protest were you on? And I was like, I'm not talking. I didn't say anything. I said, I'm not talking without my lawyer. And so me being like smart, they're like, okay, cool. You're not on any side. You're going to sit by yourself. And all my friends were in the next like cell over, all 20 of them or whatever it was. And so I just was like bored for another 4 hours, no one to talk to. And then like we're calling for bail. And then all of the people that are also calling for bail are also trying to talk about their cases to their folks in like the pen. And I'm like, everyone shut up. And so like my friend, I remember, was on the phone with his lawyer being like, they're charging me with what? But I didn't do anything. And I just had to be like, look, I'm going to get you out of this. Like if I get released early, I'm going to make sure, obviously I'm not going to leave you here, but also stop asking questions to your lawyer at this moment. This is not the right time. The whole point of like your arrest, like you should be focused on getting out, like post bail and then deal with it later. Just like shut up, read a book by yourself in your cell, whatever it is. If like they kept trying to give me ham sandwiches and I don't eat pork. And I'm like, no, that's the thing to be focused on, right? Versus like, yeah. And there are all these situations where they want to get you to talk about little things, like you're in the back of the car, they'll say things like, oh, you think you're such a smart guy, don't you? And I'm like, got nothing to say. So like, just be aware of that. And then also just like realize that there's a lot of other situations. So you shouldn't really talk to anyone until like you're out of prison or jail.
I do think that anybody who has questions about what their rights are, there are lots of organizations that ask the National Lawyers Guild to do Know Your Rights trainings. That's very available on the level in Chicago, and anywhere there's a National Lawyers Guild chapter. You can look online at nlg.org, and you can go to the Know Your Rights. They have in many different languages. There are pamphlets you can print out. But if you want a training, we can do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, yeah. Sure. So are there any grand juries right now occurring or any active subpoenas that we need to be aware of? And is there any way to find out outside of, besides word of mouth, how they're happening?
We know that like in Atlanta, there's a very active grand jury investigation. The Pittsburgh folks have told us that there are some. The whole aspect of the grand jury is that it's secret. So like even like revealing like that a grand jury is sitting is like I think by itself a crime. So like really it is like word of mouth is one of the few ways to let other folks know about it. So yeah, this is why it's like really important that we tell people like not to stay silent about these kinds of things. Like if you get called in front of one, because again, we don't ever know what they actually are investigating.
I think the grand jury secrecy is about what happens in the room, okay? So if you get a subpoena, you can tell people that you got a subpoena, and you can tell people when you're supposed to go to court, and people can go there with you. And yeah, you can definitely, and when you get out of the grand jury, you can say what you were asked, but nobody can come in with you. But so. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the federal government doesn't post, when what the grand jury is investigating. So it really is up to people who are being investigated to get the word out.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about books and literature that you would love to get into. Obviously we're in the second Trump administration, and some people have been talking about kingdoms, and we refuse kings. And as you mentioned, the history of grand juries is wrapped up in like feudalism and kingdoms and things like that. So what are the dangers of the usage of grand juries now? To attack the movement for Palestine or any movement in general. So like, what are the risks, and what are the ways that we can, prepare ourselves for the challenges to that? Because as you mentioned the slogan, nobody talks, everybody walks. But people be talking. So yeah, what are the challenges to fighting that repression today?
Okay, I'll just repeat the question quickly, and then I'll let the panelists take over. So 2 questions. The first one was, what was the type of literature you were allowed to engage in prison, and like speaking about the repression that you faced there? And then the second question is, how do we prepare for grand juries in this context under the Trump administration and with the heightened repression against the Palestine movement? Did I miss anything? That's good? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great questions, both of them. I'll take on the book one first, because the other one is a big one too. But yeah, so I also volunteer Midwest Books to prisoners before and after my incarceration. Got a lot of books from them during too. That was really awesome. So yeah, no, the censorship is rampant and has only escalated in the past like 3 to 4 years. And the new thing is political censorship has always been there. And it really comes down to the safety and security of the institution. And prison authorities have basically been given blanket deference to everything from like, you can't get like pictures, anything with maps, or Cook County Jail, you can't get pictures of guns or Game Informer magazines, or a lot of places you can't even get trades stuff. Computer programming books, of course. But yeah, everything. And the real thing, though, now is this war on, they're using the war on drugs rhetoric. They're trying to say that letters and books are soaked in drugs, and then they have no means to detect that stuff. And so they just ban all that stuff, right? So now you used to be able to get a birthday card written in crayon, but your kid's not no more. You might get a cheap copy like 4 months later on your tablet because it was double-sided, and it got sent back 2 months later. They had to send it back again, single-sided, this stupid stuff like that. Yeah, these private companies do the tablets and mail scanning. It's happened in half the states in the past couple of years. They're trying to do that shit in Illinois too.
And make you pay.
Yeah, and then make you pay to these third-party companies like GTL Securus monopolies to just access basic mail. And that is also a means in which they censor political content that they disagree with. Now, to be frank, these mailroom guards, they don't understand what they're looking at most of the time because, as we know, pigs can't read. So they'll look at the cover and they'll see like Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. They'll be like, oh, hell no, I think this book is like a little bit yellowed on the edges here, like it's an old book, it's a donated book, or it's got like a sticker from like the library that it got donated from. So they're going to use that as justification to censor something that they disagree with. But books and access to reading literature is unmistakably one of the most material ways that we are constantly being told that someone can support someone behind bars. Because there's not even a library at Cook County Jail, for example. There's not even a law library at Cook County Jail. And dude, Illinois doesn't have a budget for books. So it's just like, a lot of the work does fall on like outside mutual aid groups and abolitionist organizations to support folks inside. But books, and we hear this all the time from people writing us, man, can change and save someone's life, unmistakably. And you never know, like we're talking about 2 million people behind bars who literally have nothing to lose and everything to gain from overthrowing this sick fascist society. So we're not just setting ideas, we're arming each other, you know what I mean? So that's what I got for the book, Sitch. And the other question is also just an excellent question.
I wanted to respond to the censorship issue. The Federal Bureau of Prisons has a program that's called the Communications Management Unit, which is a euphemism for burying you alive and preventing you from communicating with your loved ones or getting regular letters or phone calls. And it's often been done with Muslim prisoners. There's one at Marion. There's one in Terre Haute. And if you just check out Communications Management Unit on, whatever browser you use, you'll find some really fascinating stuff. Daniel McGowan, who was one of the Earth Liberation people, was placed in a communications management unit solely because of his political beliefs and affiliations, and litigated and ultimately was released, but spent a long time there. And so they have even more sophisticated ways than, censoring a book that you're sent to basically censor you from your life and from the outside.
So I think we have a few more questions from the audience. Okay. Oh, sorry, I've been neglecting the side. I saw. Rhoda, do you want to go first, and then how do you go? Okay.
So I'm wondering, since you're being in prison potentially on civil, and it's your personal choice to be in prison. Prisoners that get pulled into the system through criminal reasons, they get moved through the prison system, but they're disappeared. They can go to 3-month black holes where their families on the outside don't know what prison they're in, as the state is given the right to move them to their final destination through secrecy, because they don't want you to break them out of jail or something. Does that happen also within the grand juries as well? That the family members of these individuals have, can go weeks without being able to talk to their relatives, or how does that impact?
Do you want to repeat the question?
I don't think I could repeat it.
The question was about disappearing prisoners, and does the same thing happen when people are in prison for resisting the grand jury as it does when you're convicted of a crime?
Yeah, I will say that what I've seen is typically they'll get put in the closest facility to the grand jury that's physically impaneled. So in Jeremy's case and in Chelsea's case, they were in the county jail next to the Eastern District of Virginia. So there was a lot of drunk drivers and drug cases that were going through there. So actually visiting was fairly easy because there's just most people were there on short time anyway. That's what I've seen for most cases, is that it's just the nearest jail that isn't an actual you've been sentenced to prison.
A few more audience questions. We have a few questions here I'm going to ask, and then we can go back to the audience, if that's okay. So we're wondering how we can spread these skills to less radicalized people, coworkers, and just addressing questions like how can a grand jury be resisted? They seem a little bit inaccessible topics for people that aren't as engaged. And yeah, I don't know if you guys want
I'm not going to give a general platitude. I just want one specific tool that hasn't been mentioned yet is jury nullification. And so that applies to any criminal case too, not just grand jury. But, I know people sometimes you hear, oh, I got grand jury duty. Oh, man, like, go to that shit. Not guilty, no matter fucking what, because no matter what.
Well, I think, everybody has a workplace, everybody has a family. Some people are affiliated with religious institutions. Some people have book clubs. Some people go to the gym. I mean, we're in whatever circles you circulate in, that's a potential for talking about issues that are important to you. And if people are willing, I'm sure that there can be a Know Your Rights, seminar or webinar or whatever. I mean, I think we have to sort of, I think particularly in this time with the Trump vamping on everybody, federal employees, veterans, disabled people, every population that you could possibly think of is getting screwed by the Trump administration. And there's a lot of people who are disgruntled. And so it's kind of a propitious time to start making allies and broadening our circles to be able to talk about stuff that's important and maybe inform people about different ways to work together and resist.
Just briefly, like when the Jeremy and Chelsea grand jury stuff happened, I wrote an article, which I think will be in the handouts, about like why people, my coworker was like, why don't they just tell the grand jury what they know? And I actually included it in the article. And, I sent it to her and she said, wow, this is extremely fucked up. And so I think it's not even about like that folks are less radical. It's just that I was talking to I was at the salon getting my haircut yesterday, and she's like, what are you doing this weekend? And I was like, let me tell you about grand juries. And she thought it was interesting. She asked questions. So I don't think it's about accessible or not, or radical or not. I think like people, just they've heard that an indictment is a thing, but like when you start to describe it to them, they're like, yeah, that's pretty messed up. And so, it's not super inaccessible is what I'm saying. I think a lot of people just need to be engaged in general on these issues. And so it's not like I don't think it's there's anything particular about the grand jury thing. There's a lot of detail in it and there's a lot of nuance, but yeah.
Okay, I'm going to sandwich in 3 questions and then we can go back to the audience. So what can philanthropy and funders do to protect organizers and organizations from these attacks? What are ways that power and resources can be leveraged for protection and resistance? And how will communities be impacted by this?
Quick, this shout out to all the movement lawyers, you know what I mean? Like, I can't tell you how many times the NLG had my back. People's Law Office had my back, you know what I mean? Straight up. So, and then also, I'll shout out to all the mutual aid groups and shout out to all the prisoner support groups and the folks who are writing and the folks who are showing up to court support. I think just showing that we got each other's backs, that we look out after each other, that we're not alone in this thing, does give people does ease that type of isolation that the government is trying to impart upon us. So just collective defense, build a wall of resistance.
I think the one thing I would say is not to let the fact that folks are being grand juried or investigated or whatever, scare you away from supporting them. Like the idea that someone is considered a terrorist by the government, whatever that means, or they're a criminal or they're a gang member, all of these designations that people put on groups that are marginalized or being actively othered, is not a reason to sort of pull back our support. And so especially when as we saw after October 7th with all the pro-Palestinian activists being smeared as, anti-Semitic and all this nonsense, this is just a way of getting people to pull support away, and we as a community don't need to buy into that. So I think, that's my takeaway is just if you hear that there's a grand jury investigating the mosque for local terrorism and you look a little bit deeper, you're like, wait a second, that's not what it sounds like. And so anyway, just not to be afraid of just supporting people regardless of what kind of situation they find themselves in. I think that's really critical.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to take your question, and then I know you have a question, and then Noha in the back. Okay. 3 more questions? Okay, I'm going to close stack from those three. I'm going to close stack from those after those three people. So if you want to go to the question.
Autism and other forms of neurodiversity, and like I'm just noticing like how when people are called to the grand jury, like they don't really have that support or mental health practitioners available there, you know, making those decisions. So I don't know if you can provide some context to accessibility rights, disability justice in the context of grand jury.
So just to repeat the question, so they're asking about disability justice and accessibility in the context of grand juries, and especially now given the like politicization of autism and neurological disorders under the Trump administration.
I mean, the one thing that I will say is that like the prison system is sort of designed to disable people and break people's mentality physically. You know, people who have cancer in prison are just like left to die. I mean, these are like real serious disability rights issues. You know, I think it has all the same markings as the prison system in general. I think you'll find all the same issues exist. I'm not sure about like specifically the grand jury system, but I will say that like one thing that I will stress to folks is that like you have the right to an attorney. They can't be in the room with you, but like, you know, they say, hey, what's your name? You're like, I got to go check with my attorney. Oh, Jeremy, are you in Virginia? I don't know. I got to go check with my attorney. And like finding resources to like ways to like make sure you're not alone and you're not dealing with these things is important. So I think probably like the only resource I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there are way more that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to the relationship to the grand jury. I think it's probably fair to generalize to the criminal legal system that someone who's neurodivergent is going to have difficulties. And there are some great resources, you know, out there. There's Equip for Equality is one of the organizations that occurs to me. But I just read this it was very close to my heart, this New Yorker article about starving in jail. I don't know if anybody else saw it, but it's, you know, the jails and the prisons in the United States are the main mental health institutions. After the devastation of community mental health, the jails and the prisons became the main institutions for people who were experiencing mental illness. And they are not equipped to do that. They have privatized the care, which is horrific. And this article, and I've had these cases, I have them now, documented cases all over the country where people were profoundly mentally ill and were starving and dehydrating, and the care was just not there, and died, like all over the country. It's an epidemic. And so I kind of want to endorse what Jeremy was saying earlier about the significance of staying in touch with people who are locked up, people who are caged, need us. And we need them. They are us.
Thanks. And then question.
One quick addition. Those are excellent comments. But there has been a lot of changes in the federal prison system, specifically regarding this is not really specific to grand juries, but there's a new director that Trump put on. And they're already gutting a lot of things having to do with, you know, people fought like to get little piecemeal reforms and stuff here and there. Colette Peters was a past BOP director under Biden and was seen as a reformer, actually shut down the special management unit because of their torturing people. I mean, let's be clear. Thompson, this prison system is not going to respect public health directives, not going to respect ADA, disability justice, not going to respect like trans rights, any of that stuff, right? And whatever degree that people have won any of these gains is hard fought battles won either through movement lawyers and stuff like that, or people inside bucking to get just a scrap, just to be able to wear your hair a certain way, or just to be able to have the type of diet that you need. And unfortunately, like you said, people being moved around from jail to jail to jail and stuff like that, you often have to start all over. And if you're in solitary and you have any mental distress, the system is designed, like Freddie said, to break you. And whatever gains we won through the neoliberal bullshit, all that's going away. One of the first things that Trump did was to, number one, the BOP program statements, they're all not even on the website anymore. It passed some stuff about like some anti-trans stuff where they already started moving people. Dude, it's new grounds. We're dealing with new grounds. The cruelty is just, there's no limits to the cruelty right now. So I don't even know what to say. Like, how it applies to grand juries, dude. I don't even know. Sorry about that, but it's just really, really, really bad. Really bad.
Yeah. So a question from.
I just want to say, this is a very intense legal process and procedure, but I think, in my mind, one of the important things that we have to remember as part of a movement is that everything is political. Everything. So I think, and I'm trying to pose this as a question, and I'm not expecting an answer right now, but I think, what does an effective public relations political campaign mean to collective defense?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great question. The question is like, what does a public PR campaign look like for effective defense? I mean, what happens, Jeremy will tell you the same thing, like the first thing that happens when you get to prison is like people want to know, like, what's your paperwork look like? And like, if you show up and you're like, hey, I'm resisting the grand jury investigating this thing and it's civil contempt and not criminal, everyone's going to look at you sideways, or like you're like 60 days in like informant type stuff. And we've seen in cases where people were resisting grand juries that the mere fact that there were like news articles being written about them and people writing them, they're like, okay, this thing sounds fishy, but it's actually like a person doing something legit. So that kind of political pressure really does help people on the inside as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And then last question, Noah.
This has been amazing. So much for all this information, and especially Jeremy, so much respect for everything you've been doing and for you sharing today. I'm sure it's not the easiest. My question is, so Kevin, you mentioned being part of grand jury committee. What does that look like outside of traditional court support? How are we preparing now? Because it almost feels like this is not an if, it's a when. What can we do now? How can we be proactive, knowing that this is a real possibility?
The question, I'll just restate the question. Oh, the question is just, what can we do now to prepare and be proactive and set up ourselves to give support to those facing grand juries in a different way than traditional court support?
Question, because we're up against the fascist empire on the rise, and they're going to be using these tools. DOJ is a little bit slow, but they got whole new DAs in charge. So they're going to use every tool in their box and some new ones they're going to develop. How do we? So I mean, I think it's really important that we look at previous cases. Read the indictments. Read what succeeded, what failed, like master project, like the RNC 8 I was talking about, the J20, the Cop City. Read this case law and precedent stuff, because or if you're thinking about doing something, look at what's the cost, the benefits, the risks, what laws you're up against and stuff like that. No Trace Project has a lot of really good guides on anti-repression and anti-forensics that I think is going to be extremely necessary with the rise of AI tech fascism. That we need to be aware of all the tools that the government uses, the technical tools that they use to map networks. Because if they're talking about mapping networks and getting information, yeah, we all should be using secure platforms. We all should be like using best practices. I don't know if this is the space for some of those, but check out the No Trace Project, because that has a lot of really good resources on all the above what I talked about.
I mean, I'll say that like it actually wasn't that much different, like, because like a cage is a cage. I will say though that like having a little bit of that history of knowing like what grand jury resistance entails, like, you know, it kind of sucked, but every time I would go to visit people, I would say like, oh, you know, well, maybe in 2 months you can raise this motion or that thing, and like that helped because there's not really much else to talk about other than like what's going on with the grand jury resistance. So I would say that's the only real big difference. And then like what sort of Dennis had mentioned is just, again, remembering how political all of this stuff is. But I do think like, we're doing it like right here, right now. Do you want to add anything else?
Okay, so that concludes our talk for tonight. Thank you everyone for coming. There is food over there, so help yourselves. And if there's any other questions, you can come up to people individually. And yeah, thank you.